The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this, what day is it? God, it's Tuesday. Tuesday, on the way to Christmas. So hope everybody's having a great week, great start of the work week. And I'm excited today on the show. We're going to have a conversation with Don Watkins. We're going to talk about all things writing, all things communicating ideas. We'll see where the conversation goes. And of course, you guys can participate in the conversation quite easily. We've got the super chat open. So any questions you have for Don, for me, you know, because it's Don, I'm going to say you can ask about anything. And if Don doesn't have something to say about anything, I'm sure I will have something to say about anything. But we can be pretty informal here, and you guys can go ahead. As long as you have a good dollar amount associated with the question, we're definitely open to answering it. And let's see. So I think most of you know Don. Don and I have co-authored a number of books. Oh, look, Jonathan, that's Jonathan usually comes in with like a buck or two, and there's $20, and look who's here.
Well, Yaron, I'm happy delighted to support the show and support Don, whose work I really admire, and encourage all of our audience, global audience, to make it worth Yaron's while. He always talks about the trader principles. So I'm sleeping on Yaron's couch tonight. He doesn't know it yet, but no, I'm happy to be here. And thank you, Don, for all you do. Let's see some super chats tonight to support Yaron and bringing us all this great content. So be well. I'll be listening. Thanks, guys.
That was Jonathan. The only other gig he does is Fox News. So we've hit the big time. This is great. That's Jonathan Honing, who is visiting Puerto Rico and dropped by tonight. It's great to see him. We've been friends for a long time, so we thought we'd give him a shot. All right. I was introducing Don. Yes, Don. We've co-authored a number of books: Free Market Revolution, Equal is Unfair, The Mall Case for Finance. But Don has and of course he published a book on what was the title, on FDR?
Roosevelt Care: How Social Security is Sabotaging the Land of Self-Reliance.
It's a great title and a great book. Somebody mentioned it in the chat the other day, so I know people have read it.
Did you know Leonard Peikoff is really responsible for that title, though?
No, I didn't know. Now that you mention it, I vaguely now remember something about that. But
he gave a writing class at the Yaron Institute, like a workshop, and I was working on the book, so I wrote like a little piece for it, and I just threw on that title, Roosevelt Care, and he went on for like 5 minutes about like, you don't need to read the rest of the piece. The title does everything. And I said, all right, well, now I know the title of my book.
That's excellent. It's always good to get positive feedback like that from Leonard. So that's great. But Don is now a fiction writer. And he has his latest book is a fiction book, I Am Justice. And it is available for sale on Amazon and pretty much everywhere, I guess, that books are sold. I don't know if a book sold anywhere else except Amazon. I'm sure Barnes & Noble has a few copies, so you can probably find the book at Barnes & Noble, at least online. And Valdrin Jonathan did break into my house pretty much. But he wanted to see the condo, but Jonathan Honing is in Puerto Rico. That was surprising. I only found out about 10 minutes before he showed up. So it was a lot of fun. All right. Fiction. How come? How did this come about? Have you always been interested in writing fiction? Is this something new? Yeah.
Well, I mean, some people would say that I've been writing fiction all along.
Paul Krugman would say we've been writing fiction all along.
No, I mean, the funny thing is I dabbled in it for a long time, but I thought that was really going to be my career path until I got offered the job at the Yaron Institute. Like, I always loved writing about philosophy, but it never dawned on me that like there was a career writing about ideas from an objectivist point of view. And I think one of the things we should talk about is how much opportunity I think there is for people who want to write in the nonfiction realm about objectivism, or from an objectivist perspective, either one. But it was something I always dabbled in. But then after I stopped working at the Institute, I was helping our mutual friend, Alex Epstein. And I realized that I needed kind of an outlet for just me. And I was also at that time listening to Hamilton, the musical.
Oh, okay.
And it had a huge emotional impact on me. I just thought it was so powerful. And I thought it would be really cool to not just help people think more clearly, but to give them that kind of experience. And so I wrote a novel, spent a couple of years on it, and basically shoved it in a drawer because it was promising, but it was not anywhere near publishable, and kind of set aside fiction writing for a whole other year. But I had this idea that had been kind of lingering in my mind, and then just decided at some point, all right, let me give it a go. And over the course of a few years, that ultimately became my first published novel, I Am Justice. But it was always this thing in the background where I loved reading stories, obviously, and always had, I would find myself reading any kind of book, but particularly thrillers and other crime novels, which is my favorite genre fiction. And I would always be in two mental spaces. One would be engrossed in the book, and the other being could I do that? I think I could do that. And so finally I was all right, let's figure out if I could do that.
Yeah, I read fiction, and I never think to myself, could I do that? That thought never comes up to my mind. But that's because I'm not a writer. So what are kind of the thrillers? What tell us a little bit about thrillers you like, authors you like. What is it about this genre that particularly attracts you?
Well, it's funny now that you mention it. The first time I really started, I just thought about this just now. The first time I really started reading crime novels was as the result of there used to be an objectivist book service, Second Renaissance, and it was mostly objectivist works, but occasionally they had a few fiction items by other authors that were recommended. And one of them was Robert B. Parker, who wrote a series about this detective Spencer. And maybe you guys remember the show Spencer for Hire, or they just did a revived version the last few years, I think on Amazon or maybe Netflix. And I just devoured those. And they weren't particularly interesting plots, but it was just the character was so great. He was funny, heroic, that I fell in love with them, and read a few others. And then really got into thrillers a few years later, when the mother of a girl I was dating she every evening would just be sitting there reading these books, and handed me one of them one day. And I was like, oh man, this takes everything I like about mysteries and takes it up to 11. And I just love I'm very impatient as a reader. And so I can read one serious, maybe two serious works of literature a year. But my kind of TV kind of candy entertainment has always been crime novels, because you get the heroic, but it's very much, for the ones I like, very set in this world, very kind of heroes in reality and in our current reality. And that just has always had a big appeal to me. And so there's my favorite kind of school of literature, no surprise here, is Romanticism. But I really love what Rand used to call bootleg Romanticism, where you just kind of get the stripped down plot with some heroicism and kind of a basic good versus evil thematic thing, but it's mostly just the joy of innovative plots and kind of cool characters. And I have part of me that likes not strict naturalism where it's anti-plot, but I mean, we both like the show The Wire. Yep. And I really love that kind of storytelling where you feel like you're seeing your actual world with a microscope. Yep. And I like it when then you can combine those two things, great storytelling and that kind of realism. So it's not naturalism in the strict literary sense, but it's also not high romanticism, which I think is the apex of literature, but it's not the only thing that I'm interested in.
So you mentioned a couple of names, but give us a few other names of mystery thriller writers that you like.
Well, I mean, my all-time favorite thriller is this book, I Am Pilgrim, by this guy, Terry Hayes, who used to write for the movies. And then like he just came out of nowhere, wrote this one thriller, and like hasn't done anything now in like 6 or 7 years. And it was just incredible from beginning to end. But then recently I become obsessed with this guy, Don Winslow, he's wrote a bunch of things, but he wrote this series about the cartels. And he basically took the real history of the drug cartels, but put it in a fictionalized form. And he's just such a brilliant writer, hilarious, insightful, very thematic. In other words, he has a message, but he does it. You never feel you're being preached to, which I try to do that with my books. I want to have something to say, something deeper than just here's a cool story, but it should never feel preachy. It should never feel like the message is swallowing the actual storytelling. And then, I mean, my other current favorite is Lee Child, who's Jack Reacher novels. Like, I think it's, unabashedly, here's the hero and he's smarter and tougher than everybody. And, doesn't shy away from that, doesn't get kind of caught up in this idea that, well, everybody should be a little gray and, you got to have your weaknesses and things. It's like, no, here's just a guy who's really, really awesome.
So I think I saw a preview of a TV show that is going to be about Jack Reacher.
Yeah, I think it comes out the end of this year, and so hopefully it's good. Tom Cruise did 2 movies, I think.
I like those. Those were very good with Tom Cruise. Those were good movies.
Yeah, the fans, I mean, the super fans didn't like it because Reacher's supposed to be this, 6'2", huge, 250-pound guy. I didn't care. As weird as Tom Cruise is in real life, I like watching him on the screen. So I thought
series looks like it has a big 250-pound guy.
They got that right.
And I'm not sure he can act. So that's my fear. That's the problem with guys 250 pounds and 6 something. They're not there for the acting historically.
Yeah, Hollywood is not a land of giants in many respects.
No, I mean, think Schwarzenegger, think all the former football players that became actors, not actors, Hulks, but not actors. Did you ever read Girl with the Dragon Tattoo?
You recommended it to me like right after I think the last book had been published or shortly after. Yeah. And I have it on my shelf and I started, but I never finished it. And I'm glad I didn't, because people have drawn parallels between my lead character and the female character in that book. So I desperately want to read them. But I'm glad I didn't, because I'm worried it would have influenced me.
Now I'm even more tempted to read your book because I really like her in particularly how she evolves, particularly the way I thought the first of all, there's a real plot in it goes with Dragon Tattoo, but both the lead characters, but particularly the female, really evolves through the series and really grows through the series, more so in the books than in the movies. And I mean, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of hers.
All right. Well, yeah, then I definitely have to go back to that, because I think I got just to the point where they introduced her in the first book and not much.
Oh, so you're still early. You're still early.
Because one of the things he does,
she's a little creepy early on, because she's I mean, you learn about why she's like she is, but she's definitely an outsider and and very much she's got the tattoos and she's got, she's very much weird, and she grows on you throughout the thing. And the 3 novels, she really does. I
mean, the description that I read, she sounds like the girls I wanted to date in high school. So
okay. I never wanted
tastes may differ.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. You're learning things about Dawn you didn't expect to. This is good. I promised people this is going to be the best episode, and of the Yaron Brook show ever. And so far, we've started with a special guest, and we've had several revelations. So we're off to a good start. This is good. So you mentioned, so before we get to that, what can you say about I Am Justice without giving anything away that will intrigue people enough to want to read the book? I mean, this is about a softball of a question. It's like, this you say that pitch that just knocks this out of the ballpark.
You say that, and yet the struggle I've always had with all of our books, all of my books is, all right, I've written it. I know it's good. What is the pitch? And, but the basic idea is that you have this girl who's, by all accounts, pretty normal, seems to have some secrets in her past, but basically something comes up where she ends up killing a classmate in pretty much self-defense for various reasons, can't go to the cops. But what happens is the next morning, what she finds out is the cops didn't find one body. They found 3, and it doesn't look like self-defense. It looks like a vicious hate crime. And so now this college student basically has to solve a crime that she was involved with in order to save herself. And so, this is taking place on college campus, and, you get into some of the cancel culture issues and a lot of struggles with questions about race, but ultimately a lot of questions just about the nature of good and evil that she has to grapple with in order to try to come out of this thing alive.
Cool. All right. So everybody go out and buy the book. You said there was going to be a marketing push? Is there is anything happening towards the end of the year?
Well, so I went with this publisher called Story Grid, which is sort of a hybrid between indie publishing and traditional publishing. It was founded by a guy who used to be one of the top editors and agents in New York. And he came up with a whole methodology that helps you write books, which I found really helpful. But then he and his partner decided they were going to start their own publishing because they saw kind of problems both in independent and in traditional publishing. I know you've seen some of the traditional publishing. Yeah. In traditional publishing, this is basically what they tell you, which is bring us a finished book. We're going to do almost no editing. Bring us an audience. We're going to do almost no marketing. And we're going to keep like 90% of the money from the book. And it's like, oh, that sounds like a great deal. What am I getting out of it? It's like, well, we'll get you in bookstores, maybe. And then if you look at where your sales come from, you see, yeah, that's really not a great deal. But then on the other hand, indie publishing is hard because you're all on your own. You have to pay all the upfront costs. You have to do all the marketing. If you have editing, you're paying for all of it. And so they kind of take over that and they say like, look, we're going to give you in-depth editing by some of the best editors you'll ever find, which is certainly my experience. We're going to do, we're going to pay all the upfront costs and things like that. And we're going to do a big part of the marketing. And then we're going to give you 50% of the money from the book. So I was like, that's a much better deal. But the marketing specifically right now, what our focus is getting in those first 100 reviews on Amazon. Because until you have a significant number of reviews, you don't really have the credibility to be able to kind of push the novel to new readers. Because what most readers do if they reach an unfamiliar author, because think about how you buy fiction books, right? It's either an author or you came with a really strong word of mouth recommendation, right? It's not like you heard some really good kind of hook for a story. Usually not. It's usually one of those two avenues. But if you are going to try to push out and reach new readers, you have no choice to try to overcome that barrier. And one of the most important things that you do is when people do find the book, they need to see like, all right, I have good reason to think this might be good. And Amazon reviews are just so important here. So if anybody has read the book, you might see, oh, there's 70 reviews now. What does mine matter? No. They really, really matter. Even once we're past 100, like books that do well, in novels that do well, really you're talking 1,000+ reviews is like the real kind of winner. But in any case, our push right now is just to get in the reviews. And then in February, we're going to start making a real marketing push. And they have a bunch of stuff that they do, including, different kinds of specials, advertising dollars, things like that. So right now it's kind of laying the groundwork. And part of what I like about what they're doing is if you remember our books, Yaron, the idea was like the first 2 or 3 weeks was really all that the publisher cared about. That's all that mattered. Everything was about crushing those weeks. And after that, it was like, all right, we're on to the next thing.
On what we could, it's over. Yeah. And the publishing is generally, historically, is everything is in the first few weeks. You try to get it on the bestseller lists, and then nobody puts any effort into it, and book sales just plummet after that, unless there are a few classic books that keep on selling, but most books just go nowhere after that.
Yeah. I mean, if you're, one of the top 0.001%, your book will have legs, but it's super difficult. But the way they think about editing is over the course of a year, or marketing is over the course of a year. And then what they really believe in is that it's really over the course of an author's career, so that to really build a readership. And if you look at people who are super successful, like Lee Child, who does the Jack Reacher series, it's a slow, steady climb. And it's not until you get to like the 5th or 6th book where you've really started to build up a foundation and you start kind of hitting the bestseller list. So I'm not patient, but I'm trying to learn to be with this book, and just really focus on trying to get as many readers as possible, and then working on the follow-up and hopefully a series of follow-ups as quickly as possible.
So the idea here is this is a series with the same heroine.
Yeah. And so I finished the first draft of the follow-up right now, and I'm doing a second draft, and then we'll send it along to my editor. So, I mean, I hope that by this time next year, people will have the second one in their hands. So, if I can crank one of those out a year, that will be
that's pretty amazing.
Pace.
On top of everything else that you do.
Well, I mean, I hear a lot of independent authors, their business model requires like 4+ books a year. Jesus. And that just leaves me baffled how they do it. But the way I do it is actually pretty simple, which is just I wake up really early and every day get in a couple hours of work on it. And then, when I have some free time, like on weekends or vacations, just really hammer at it with everything. And, it adds up quicker than you think. So, and I mean, I wrote another nonfiction book this year that's right now with editors. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and this is mostly, again, just in a couple hours a day of consistent work.
That's amazing. All right. So all of you who read Don's novel already, you've got your homework. Homework is simple. Go to Amazon, write a review. It can be 3 sentences, but write a review. Just get something written. Don't just give it a ranking. Don't just, what I do, which is just click on the 5 stars. No, actually write a few sentences, right? So that is the most valuable thing you can do in terms of helping the book right now. So plus, of course, buy 20 copies and give it as Christmas presents. That would be good too. But short of buying a bunch of copies and giving them out to friends, writing a review is the next best thing you can do.
Just a shout out to my friend Steve, who was kind enough to buy 10 copies. And then in order to get me to sign them, decided to give me a set of baseball cards. And I thought, well, shouldn't I be the one doing a favor for you for buying them? So they're definitely amazing fans out there.
Yeah, guys, you don't have to bribe us to get us to sign our books. It's like, everybody, could you please sign? Of course I'll sign your book. What do you mean?
Yeah, we are not yet at the stage of having trouble getting through the airport or something.
No, not at all. So how do you come up with these stories? I mean, I kind of get, we know how we work on nonfiction, but nonfiction is kind of straightforward. I mean, you look out into the world, it's kind of stuff. We're trying to describe what's actually happening in reality and explain it with a philosophy we understand and know. It's not necessarily easy, but it seems pretty straightforward. Fiction is like you're creating another universe. You're creating something that doesn't exist. How do you come up with those stories? What's the creative process like?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it's surprising to me how few authors have interesting things to say about this, because I think there is so much that you can actually introspect about, like how that actually happens. One thing that I'll mention that I think is really helpful is, like, it starts with a not very good idea. And I don't mean like a bad idea, but the hardest part is, and Ayn Rand makes this point about editing, that people freeze up because they try to like write the perfect draft. And she has this idea that, like, no, until there's something in existence, you can't improve it. You can't improve on a zero. And what I've found with my novels is that it usually starts with an idea that isn't really much of an idea, but it's something. And then I can build on it and keep adding to it until you go, oh, now it's interesting, but I need a something. And with this one, this gives away a little bit, but it's in the first couple chapters. So I think you can probably get this far just looking on Amazon, the preview. I was watching a Netflix. They had a documentary about strip clubs, and I was watching it, I think with my wife, and it was just, I was like, this is a really weird, bizarre, and intriguing world. And it would be really fascinating to have something that was kind of partially set in this world. And like, what would that look like? And how would it, I'm not into like writing something extremely tawdry or whatever, but like that world just fascinated me because it's this weird borderline between legitimate but illegitimate. I mean, if you remember The Wire, and this is something very true, it's a really great place to own if you're trying to launder money and, being business. Connected to crime. Yeah. And so I that was just the start, but that's not a story, right? And so then just little pieces would get added to it, but it was having this kind of like one magnet piece and then kind of building around it. And so what I always tell people is don't try to come up with a good idea, come up with an idea. You can always figure out a way to make it better. But if you sit around going, what's my great idea? That never happens. And if it does, I think it kind of happened with my previous novel, the one that didn't work out. Like I just had this premise. It was a real what if. So I'll even give it away because I'm never actually going to write it. But it was, what if there was an illegal immigrant, but instead of like, having a typical immigrant job, he ended up creating like the next Uber, the next breakthrough company. And yet, there's a target on his back if his identity is ever found out. Okay. And that one, I think, just came to me sort of out of the blue, but usually it's a bad idea that just you keep adding layers to it, keep adding complexity, keep looking for sources of conflict. There's a really good example in Ayn Rand's The Art of Fiction, where she kind of goes through how, she doesn't tell you she's doing this, but it's in effect, how would you create from scratch the plot of Notre Dame by Hugo? And you see, just starting with kind of a basic setup that isn't too interesting. If you keep thinking in terms of intensifying conflict, you can create this larger than life story. And I think that's really right.
Yeah. So now we know that everything that Don knows about strip clubs comes from a Netflix documentary.
Oh, no. Well, thankfully, I was able to do a good amount of research. I'm not gonna...
There you go. I was going to say, it's a little rationalism to do it on base of a documentary. So good.
Yeah. So, but actually, that I will say that's the area that I'm weakest at, or if I look at the people who are like the top people in the crime genre, if they're not ex-law enforcement, they're often journalists.
Okay.
And if they're not journalists, at the very least, they've built up a lot of relationships with people in the FBI or in, military intelligence. And it allows them to have a lot of specificity that builds realism and credibility. And so, that's something that I think, longer term, I'm trying to do more and more, raise the threshold of like how well researched this is. Because I think to really compete at the top levels, you have to have that. You can't just be going off your own plotability. And that's part of why my book is really about an amateur sleuth, right? It's not about the police. It's not about the FBI. It's about a college girl trying to deal with some, a lot of bad stuff happening to her. And it's like, all right, I know that world. Like, I went to college. It's written, in places I've lived in. And it's, kind of situations that I had firsthand experience it with. And so part of my vision for the series was this idea of, we have these kind of larger than life heroes like Jack Reacher, and we get their backstory, but we never see somebody go from like pretty normal to becoming like, how do you become that? How do you gain those skills? How do you develop those relationships? So I wanted to like take a normal person and kind of put her on that trajectory. And one of the things that I anticipated was, as I learn, she'll be learning, and we can kind of like grow up together in terms of knowing more about these different universes.
Yeah. That's very cool. So, by the way, if you're looking for the book, I just put the link in the chat. I'll put it in the description below after the show. I should have thought of that in advance. But you're probably having a hard time finding it on Amazon because you're putting in Don Watkins, which was what I did for a long time and couldn't get it. It's under DP Watkins. So it doesn't come up together with Don's nonfiction books.
Yeah, that's
it's kind of a separate world.
Yeah, my publishers. I did submit before I submitted to them to a few agents, and I didn't get any responses. And I'm not using this as a full excuse because it was definitely not a perfect novel when I sent it out. But the publishing world is, I mean, if you go on Twitter and look up and type in agent and just look up all the people who have agents in their profile, almost all of them will have their pronouns in it, just to give you an indication of it's very woke, very left. And the book world is really skewed that way as much as like college universities. It's very much that way. I mean, they're all English majors, right? So like, what are you going to expect? And my publishers, they're pretty courageous in the sense of here's a white guy writing about race issues who has a background writing books like Equal is Unfair. And, but they did say, look, we don't want to alienate new people who might not agree with your politics. I said, I don't want to alienate them either. So they said, would you be open to a pen name? It can be close to yours, but something to separate the two, just create a little space. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And so I didn't view that as a kind of weakness. And I kind of like having that sort of separation. It helps me separate my projects. I have like an email list for people who are interested in fiction and versus all the stuff that I do in my name and with you, Yaron. So I think that kind of separation is good. But yeah, I should have made sure to let people know that. So thank you for pointing it out.
Yeah. So there's somebody's got a sense of humor here. They say Yaron should write a novel too. Imagine how good it would be. Yeah, imagine. It would be terrible. I'm not a storyteller unless it's true stories, which I can tell. So let's see. Daniel asked a question here directly related. Let's see. There it is. In what way did writing fiction supplement, improve your nonfiction writing?
I don't know that it did. I definitely know that getting better as a nonfiction writer helped my fiction because, I mean, you just get constant practice at making sentences that are clear. And it's the surprising, I think one thing people underestimate in fiction is how important clarity is and how hard it is, right? Because it's hard enough to kind of explain a philosophic concept. I mean, it's extremely hard and certainly to do it precisely, but it's a different kind of hard to paint a whole universe in people's minds that feels real and they can see everything. Particularly if you're writing action sequences, having a sense of where people are and how they're moving and so on, it's really hard. And I think there's no way, I know for a fact that, having spent a decade at the Ayn Rand Institute with Alex Epstein and getting constant feedback on my writing and really knowing what it meant to write clear and logically, that was such a huge asset. And then writing books generally, you learn to keep an enormous context in your mind. And it is very hard in any book, but with a novel, there's so many threads, including different plot arcs, different character arcs, and those have to be integrated. You're trying to track a bunch of clues, surprises, and it's the most overwhelming thing. And only because I had built up that muscle writing, the 4 books that I had done before then, do I think there was even a hope that I was able to do it in the realm of storytelling.
That's great. It's not always the case that the skill translates. But that's great. So Daniel writes, a different Daniel Chapman. I audibly laughed when I read the name Paul Cobra. I think his name appears exactly once, and yet I feel like I know everything about him. Great book. Look forward to the sequel. So Daniel, go to Amazon, write a review. That's All right, let's see.
That's an interesting compliment. When you're able, so I think it's a real skill. Ayn Rand was masterful at this. Particularly when you read like her, like at party scenes when she's introducing a bunch of characters, and yet all of them feel so distinct just because of one or two little details. Because there's kind of two ways that you can convey character very quickly. One is that you come up with just a really distinctive and original way to bring out who they are. I always, think of, and I'm going to go blank on his name, so this is undermining my point, but the character in the Fountainhead who had dandruff, something like that. Okay. But in any case, the other way that you can do it, and this is the more common way, is that you're using kind of a stock character, right? And so all you have to do is suggest a type, and then the person gets, oh, that's the kind of, rich, smarmy businessman. Oh, that's the kind of like wild frat boy. And, that kind of thing is easy. And hopefully the compliment is that I was able to convey this, a real distinctive character quickly. Because that I think it's a challenge. When you do it, it feels, it's really fulfilling.
So it turns out somebody in the chat, Chandler, has done a review of I Am Justice, a video review on his YouTube channel.
Oh, that's awesome. Email me, don@donswriting.com. I need to see that.
That's Chandler. So I don't know what his YouTube channel is. Yeah, I can't, I don't think he's provided that info, but Chandler, email Don with a link to your review. Let's see these other questions, if any of them have anything to do with what we're talking about. Nope. Don't forget, if you want to ask Don a question about writing, about anything, use the super chat. We'll take the writing questions first, and then we're leaving the kind of more broad questions until afterwards. So we'll get to those later on. So you mentioned before that you're interested in kind of using or fiction to convey or to communicate an idea, to communicate something more abstract. So say more about that, because most of the time that objectivists have tried to write fiction, it's the story is, the writing is terrible, the story is blah, but they get all the speeches in, and they're hitting you over the head with objectivism. How do you find the balance, and what kind of ideas do you think, unless you're Ayn Rand, right? But what kind of ideas do you think you can convey in a thriller, in a whodunit type story?
Well, yeah. So, one thing I'll definitely stress is my goal certainly wasn't to sell objectivism with the book. Now, I didn't think that selling objectivism is irrelevant to writing the book. I think the best thing I could do to sell objectivism would to become famous as a good fiction writer and have that huge platform from which to talk about my ideas and, promote nonfiction works. So I don't think that they're conflicting goals, but my goal certainly wasn't to spread objectivism. But look, you know me, Yaron, the only thing I'm really interested in is philosophy or other issues insofar as I can relate them to philosophy. And so there was no way there wasn't going to be philosophy in the book. But look, I really took seriously who is this character, and that there's no way that just some like college girl discovered objectivism, right, and is going to go around preaching it. And I just thought it would have been really inauthentic to the world to have it at that level. But I do think there are ideas that I agree with, that objectivism agrees with, that are more accessible and the kind of thing that an honest person would come to on their own. And certainly if you think in the crime genre, you're dealing pretty much with, let's call it like more evident kinds of values, not so much the conflicts of individualism versus collectivism, or reason versus mysticism, but good versus evil, and having a sense of what it means to be good, and how people corrupt their souls. And there's a lot of kind of conventional or semi-conventional wisdom, I think, that is, on the right track. If you just take something like the virtue of justice or the virtue of honesty, objectivism shines a much greater, deeper light on what those mean. But most people regard them as virtues. And I think you can bring that out in a novel like this. And I certainly tried to bring them out. And certainly a lot of psychology that's informed about objectivism is going to inform my characters, like my understanding of, how a person goes bad and the kind of trajectory that evasion like leads, and the kind of logic of evasion, I think, is very much sort of in the back of my mind, but even comes out in the novel. So there's ideas in the novel. It is it's really challenging to integrate plot and theme. And Ayn Rand, one of their underappreciated insights was what she called a plot theme, which is not just a summary of your plot. It's a one sentence summary of your plot that embodies an abstract theme. And it's only by having that, plot theme. For example, in Atlas Shrugged, the theme, the abstract idea is the role of the mind in human life. But the plot theme is the mind on strike, the men of the mind going on strike. And that plot theme, you can see, translates directly into this abstract idea. And it's that plot theme that allows her to select the characters, the events, and so on. And I think that's the only way that you can really figure out how to actually embody ideas and not just make it characters mouthing ideas. It's a really tricky thing. And, that's why I say, like, with a thriller, any genre fiction, with the possible exception of fantasy and science fiction, where I think you can do more with ideas. Ayn Rand in Bootleg Romanticism said that thrillers, the theme is always good versus evil. I would put it a little bit more. It's good versus evil with life or death stakes. And so you're dealing with almost a perceptual level form of good versus evil, right? Like, he is evil, but he never physically assaults anybody, right? And so it's very hard for people to get, why is he evil? He doesn't even seem evil at the beginning, but a character who plants a bomb in New York City, we can all see, okay, that's evil. Like, you don't have to know much more than that. So you can deal with moral issues, I think, at a level that has to bring in less philosophy.
To what extent do you have a plot theme worked out before you write? When does a plot theme come into consciousness?
I'm constantly going back and forth on it. With this new book, it was more clear cut in my mind because I had more context and I had learned a lot. With the last one, I would just constantly throw stuff into a draft and then go, wait, what the heck am I really trying to say? And, it was a very messy sort of process, but that's fine. The key is that you need to know by the end of the process what it is. It's just very helpful to know it at the beginning of the process. But yeah, that took me a long while to get clear on. And I would say probably it was only halfway through the book that I got, all right, what I'm really trying to illustrate something about justice, which shouldn't have been a big surprise to me given the name of my character, but it actually was.
It strikes me as one of the things that this kind of art can concretize is the idea of a heroism and the idea of man as an efficacious and the use of his mind as being efficacious, right? So those seem to be other philosophical kind of characteristics that can be expressed in these kind of novels.
Totally. And in fact, that's one reason why I respond more to thrillers in books than I tend to in TV and movies. TV and movies properly can be primarily visual. That is, you can watch John Wick just doing awesome karate moves and, shooting up 1,000 bad guys. And it looks really cool. It's a fun experience, or something like Die Hard, right? Where, you just have these crazy action sets and scenes. In a book, that doesn't really work that well. If I just describe somebody punching a lot of people for 30 pages, you would just go cold, right?
I fast forward in those scenes in the movies anyway.
It's really hard. I mean, it is hard to make them interesting in movies. I mean, that's why not every action film is Die Hard, right? You have to care about the characters. They have to be clever. But I think in books, it really has to be more the problem solving ability, the mind of a protagonist that you fall in love with. Even if there's action, even if they're strong, they have to outsmart their opponent. They have to get out of impossible situations through their intelligence. And that's my favorite kind of thing. And so I really worked hard to do that. And that I think is the hardest part for me of writing thrillers is how do I make something that like I if I was reading it wouldn't be able to figure out, how it was going to play out. Like, how am I going to outsmart the readers? Because readers are so smart if they're into a genre, right? They've read 1,000 of these, probably literally many thousands of them. And, they've seen all the tropes. They know a lot of the tricks that authors play. And so trying to think one step ahead of that is, to me, one of the most challenging parts of the genre.
So Brad is asking, what valuable insights were gained for you during the process of thinking up and writing I Am Justice?
I mean, the most valuable insights were really just about the process of thinking. So I gave the one example of starting with an idea and then striving to make it interesting. But one of the things that I found, and this has worked really well for me in my nonfiction writing too, is, and indeed, I really discovered this initially, though I hadn't really kind of put a pin in it as a method point back when we were writing our first book together, is the crucial power of you hit a problem in writing or in thinking. And well, what do you do if you just can't figure it out? Now, what I would often do is go ask you or ask Onkar, but right, I can't do that with my storytelling. But for when you can't do that, the major thing that I found was that if I really precisely articulated the problem as clearly as possible, and then went for a walk, 15, 20, 30-minute walk, I'm not exaggerating when I would say 80% of the time I'll have the answer by the end of the walk. It's that kind of, but I really want to stress the first part because people will often give that advice, right? Go for a walk, get away from your computer. And that's true. But what most people skip is the first part, which is really precisely pinpoint the problem or the question you're trying to answer, because the clearer that is, the more your subconscious really can work for you. If it's kind of murky or muddy, you'll spend the whole time just going, what am I confused about? And that's fine, but you're not going to get the kind of answers. And so it was more insights like that about how to be creative and come up with creative ideas, not just creative fiction, but all kind of creative thinking. And I indeed, I'm writing a book on essentially on ethics. And one of the things that I kind of go into is the kind of creative thinking that every productive career involves. And I would say the vast majority of those insights I got at from writing fiction. And that's where I was really able to isolate it and pinpoint it, because you can make a clear distinction in that universe between is this a knowledge problem or a thinking problem, right? Like in philosophy, sometimes I just don't know enough about what Kant thought, or, if for one of our books, I don't understand exactly how inflation works. And so it's more of a knowledge gathering problem and versus a pure thinking problem. And fiction really isolates it into predominantly pure thinking problems.
So Bree asks, how do you avoid accidental plagiarism? All the stories I have read are swimming around in my head.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think I wouldn't worry about it because, first of all, to actually execute in a story, like if you were plagiarizing more than like tidbits here or there, like you would realize it. And so I think the story will largely come out original. And given our culture today, people will view any of that as Easter eggs, or at least you can sell them as Easter eggs. Because I certainly have a few tidbits in there that are direct references to things. But it's, I don't mean to suggest that like plagiarism is okay, but I just think that it's probably not as big as a problem as you're worried about, because there's just so much that goes into making anything work that your influences will be there, but not in a way that's like actually stealing from them. And then if you're stealing from them, like I have a scene where I steal from Hugo. it's completely changed. But the fundamental dynamic of it is there.
Yeah.
And so I basically do plagiarize one of his lines, but I consider it a hymn or an ode rather than stealing.
Yeah, and he's
He
copyright
won't
is
sue me.
expired.
Yeah,
Copyright
so-
is expired. All right, Seth asks, Don, you produce and distribute much of your own content. How do you know when it's time to get a team of professionals behind you? I know the answer to that. When he's making so much money that he can afford to hire them.
That helps. Yeah. I mean, for most of the stuff I do, well, I shouldn't say most. For some projects that I do, it's just me and I'll just put it out there and I'm okay with it, not being as great as it could be. Like I couldn't put out the content that I do if everything was going through a review process. But certainly for the most serious, important projects I go through, I want feedback from people. So if I'm, writing my book on ethics, you better believe I'm knocking on the door, as it were. I won't name their names, but the usual suspects, people who really understand objectivism, really understand communication. And in fiction, there it was even more apparent. Like I came into objectivism, a career in objectivism. Like I had spent 10 years on my own reading and writing about it. And by one standard, I knew a lot. But I mean, as Yaron could attest, like it was probably 5 or 6 years before it was really like, oh, like this is really good work. This stands out. And the only reason I got there was because I got people like Yaron and Onkar saying week after week, this isn't right. This isn't convincing. Nobody's going to understand this. And so I knew when I got to fiction, it would be ridiculous not to be able to really go to excellent editors and storytellers and get feedback. And in terms of when in the process, I mean, there's two ways to think about it. One is you do the best that you can and then you seek out feedback. The other is you try to get feedback kind of early, knowing that, you're going to make a lot of mistakes anyway. So get feedback early. I'm somewhere in the middle. I write something I'm genuinely happy with, and maybe I could eke out some improvements, but I know like, no, this is pretty close to where I would be able to take it on my own and then go to editors. With the new book, I've been, blessed is maybe too religious a word for it, but that's how it feels emotionally to be able to work again with the same editor I did for my first novel.
Yeah,
and so I've been able to have more upfront discussions the way that, like, when Yaron and I were writing together, we do a lot of, talking at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end, bring in other editors at the end. So I'm a big fan of getting as much feedback. I shouldn't say as much as you can, getting a lot of feedback, a lot of quality feedback. But at a certain point, you just need to say, all right, like, this is where I am. I'm going to put something out. There's a philosophy that some writers have, like our friend Leonard Peikoff, Ayn Rand had it, where you're writing for the ages. And if you're going to put something in writing, it better be by the, best of your possible human ability, as perfect as you can make it. I admire that. That's not how I approach my writing. My goal is that I want to turn out something that I'm proud of and that I think is good, but I want to move on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And I'm willing to live with the fact that, 10 years after my death, maybe nobody will read what I wrote during my lifetime, but I had fun writing it and I made an impact in the world I lived in. And that, I think you just have to decide what kind of writer you want to be.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I like that. Shazbad asked, Don, would you consider writing a story that takes place in an objectivist parallel universe?
Probably not. And the basic reason is this. Objectivism is not known to the public, which means if you're going to put it in your books, you got to make a big deal out of it. And it's got to make sense of what the ideas are, how they're shaping things, what's wrong with conventional ideas. It's, if Ayn Rand had grown up in a world where everybody had already, where Aristotle's ideas, had reigned with, some improvements that had evolved over the years, and it was essentially objectivism. It's a real question of if she would have written such philosophic novels. She might have, but I mean, the way she explained it, she wanted to write about the ideal man. And it was because no philosopher, the culture at large, didn't share her view of the ideal, that she had to formulate a whole philosophy in order to portray it. So I don't want to insist that hers would have been less philosophic, but I would say it was her mission necessitated it. But my mission is different. Like, I write fiction because I really enjoy reading crime novels and telling crime stories. And so my real goal for the reader is I want them to have a lot of fun, but walk away with the sense that, there was more here than just like, a couple fight scenes. They should get that there's some depth. They should feel like there's some weight to it, and that the heroes are not just, strong and, good at shooting guns. But the goal for me personally in fiction is not ideological or philosophic. But that's why I'm always going to do both. I'm always going to be, in my ideal world, I'd put out 2 books a year, one nonfiction and one fiction. And that's sort of how I see the division of labor.
Florida Nick says he just bought a Kindle version and start reading it soon.
Awesome.
Thanks, Florida Nick. Daniel asked, how do you objectively judge your own creative work? Example, sometimes I'll write a scene, creative description, analogy, etc., and think this is good, and then this is pure shit a minute later.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, this goes back to what I was saying about nonfiction, what I learned from nonfiction, which is it takes a long time to judge your work objectively. And when I moved into fiction, there is still a gap between what I thought was good and then what really was good, but it wasn't as big as it would have been if I hadn't spent, 10 years professionally, or I guess 12 professionally at that point, of really learning how to be objective to people. But the other thing that I'll say, and so that is a role where editors can help you learn how to judge your own work. The other thing I say, so I just started a newsletter called Chapter 1. I think it's like firstchapter.substack.com. And part of what I do is really start to look at and evaluate the first chapter by other crime writers at a really fine-grained level. And so part of what I'm trying to do there is solve what I think is the hardest problem to teach somebody, which is, you can teach them structure, you can teach them how to weave a good plot, but how do you sentence by sentence make a scene pop, make it real? And so that's kind of what I'm trying to learn inductively, or conceptualize through inductive examples, as I'm trying to look at just 3 different authors a week, their first chapters, try to draw every lesson I can. And so hopefully, in a year or two, what I would really like to do is at some point be able to write a book just on that problem, which I think would go a long way to helping people. How do I write, a scene that's really killer and know that it's good? Because there's a lot of amazing advice for big picture, macro level stuff in writing. I don't think there's a lot of good stuff at the line by line level. And so hopefully that's something I can, if not solve, contribute to enabling people to improve.
Cool. Let's see. Travis is asking for Richard. It's a little weirdly phrased. We'll see if you get what he's getting at. Does Don do children, or are they superfluous to his thinking as well?
Yeah, so I assume this means like including them in the books, because Ayn Rand was often criticized for not having kids in her books.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's any kids in this novel, and I don't even think there might be in the next one. I'm not opposed to it, and I'm really interested in kids. I mean, I have 2 of them. And
yeah, I was going to say Don definitely does kids.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really pro kid and think they're amazing. They're really hard to write well. Oh, I do actually have some scenes in the first book, but definitely in the second one that are have some kids in them, and it's really hard to do well. But particularly, it's amazing how much you forget. As my kids are 8 and 6, and I already, if you ask me to write a 4-year-old, I would have a lot of trouble. So I'd have to hunt down whatever friends or family have, 4-year-olds, if that's what I was doing. But also, if I'm writing crime novels and thrillers, there's not much that makes me uncomfortable. Like I can deal with like pretty dark stuff in books, but anything that where kids are in danger is like a little bit of a trigger warning for me. So I probably wouldn't want to write that. But I'd love to work them in, as like comic relief.
Yeah, I think there's this implication that, I don't know, that you got to write everything in. I mean, you probably don't have any philosophers in the book. Does that mean you're anti-philosophy, Don? Is that it? Right? You don't like philosophers anymore because you didn't put any philosophers in your book. It's ridiculous to view fiction and Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead ultimately a fiction in that kind of way that she had to cover everything. Every form of human experience has to be in the book. Otherwise, she was obviously against it.
Yeah. And I mean, I would have loved to see her write about children, but it wasn't a primary interest of her. And it wouldn't have fit what she was trying to do with her heroes to see them as children, because seeing them as children, you're inherently showing them as kind of vulnerable and weak in a certain way. And she's trying to give you reverence for an ideal. And so you experience the ideal more powerfully if you see them fully formed and kind of ready-made. And I think given her purpose, it would have been detrimental to do anything else. And so even when you do get, younger, not super young kids like Dagny and Francisco, they're believably young in terms of their spirit and level of knowledge, but they're also incredibly mature and more fully formed than most kids are. And it's important that Galt is really the pinnacle of the novel. And there we don't see, any of his childhood.
No, but we don't know much about Galt anyway, right? I mean, we don't know much about his story. We have episodes that we know, we see shadows, but we don't know much about Galt. The novel's not about Galt in the end. I mean, it's about, in terms of the characters, characterization, Dagny and Reardon are the ones who really developed. Let's see, Scott asks, you being one of the better people offering practical skills to spread good ideas, how do you see the path to objectivism gaining more influence?
Well, man, we could talk about that forever, but I'll just name one thing. And I kind of indicated it earlier, but my basic view is that there's kind of two different paths that we have to go down. One is that we have to have world-class training for people who want to use the ideas, certainly as professional intellectuals, but in any sort of field. And thankfully, we do have world-class training. I think that's what the Ayn Rand Institute provides. And I think what Tal and his team are doing with the new Ayn Rand University and really making training their focus, I'm 100% behind. I mean, I have said many, many times I would not be where I am without the OAC and all of the other things I learned from ARI. But then it's all right, well, what are all those people you're training doing? Yeah. Like what does it work out? And there, my view is that the way I'll often put it, which is a little bit of an overstatement, but not much, is that ideas don't persuade people. It's ideas as advocated and embodied by individuals that persuade people. What it is that you have to have people who are compelling, interesting, who people look up to and think, yeah, I want to be like that person. Maybe not totally, but at least in the relevant sphere. Like, I want to be like that businessman. I want my mind to work, like people say that about, I want my mind to work like Elon Musk. They need to be saying that about objectivists.
Not all the time, hopefully.
Yeah. But the point being that if you're telling people how to think and how to live, they need to look at you and go, I want to think and live like that person. And so we need people like that in the culture. And thankfully, we have some of them in different fields who have really risen to the pinnacle of their fields. If you take, Adam Mossoff in law, if you take Alex Epstein in kind of the energy debate, if you take what a number of objectivists are doing in the field of education, there's, I think, more examples like that. What John Allison did as the head of BB&T. There's a number. These are examples of people who have achieved a tremendous amount, and they embody objectivism, let alone, use and preach it. And I think that's what you need to do at scale. And I think that's hard because you can't teach a lot of what goes into that, right? You can teach somebody objectivism, you can give them a great methodology, but at the end of the day, you're really asking for innovators. And if you're talking in the field of ideas, frankly, you need also charismatic charismatic intellectuals, if not charismatic in person, then at least on the page. And you just can't train that. What you can do, though, is you can try to appeal to the best minds in the culture. And so one of the things that I get very frustrated by is when we too much judge success or failure by pure numbers. Oh, look at this guy got it. He was on a video with 5 million people that viewed it. I don't care about 5 million if it alienates the 5 best young minds who go, this is kindergarten philosophy. That's not the real thing. You need to appeal to the best minds because they're the ones who become those John Allisons and Adam Mossoffs. And so I think that, again, it's another thing that ARI does really well is putting out, people like Onkar front and center and showing objectivism in its full depth and power, and not dumbing it down, not shying away from its real meaning and implications. And so that's the short version: is do a lot of training and then allow the best minds to rise to the top and hopefully do great things. And in my view, there's not really any other shortcuts than that.
Yeah, it's good to see Onkar doing a lot more videos and a lot more stuff out there. He's been on YouTube all the time recently, so which is great. Now
I hear from him more than I did when I worked with him.
Yeah, I know. We just need to get more people watching because it's too good of material to have this few. Which brings us to Daniel's question. For nonfiction, sometimes it's demoralizing for objectivists to know how few people will read and be persuaded by their work. How do you stay motivated through stretches like this? P.S. Bought your book today.
It depends on your goals. In general, you should be motivated by your goal, right? And if you're not achieving it, like that just means, all right, what do I need to learn to get closer to my goal? Now, for me, my goal in terms of my personal motivation has never been changing the world. Like that was more just I want that to happen. And I worked in an organization where that was our mission. So I was aiming at that. But for me personally, what I really wanted to do was understand Ayn Rand's ideas and write books that I thought were the most effective way to communicate those ideas on whatever issue that I was dealing with. And so the numbers really didn't matter that much to me. It was, and I think we did some decent numbers given how hard it is to sell books and given that we're selling super unpopular ideas.
And our books are still selling. I still do events where I'm doing book signings and stuff like that. So Free Market Revolution and Equal is Unfair still sell, decent numbers.
Yeah, and I've had the same experience. And going back to my previous point, it's who's reading them is impressive too. Is that many of the people who I hear about, they read it and everything. They're this isn't just like some high schooler, and I love that high schoolers read them. So I'm not putting that down, but it's people who are high level businessmen, like really smart, really sharp people who recognize like this is an interesting kind of take on these issues. So yeah, it doesn't, I'm not very easily frustrated by that kind of thing, but then B, it's just not my personal mission in life. And I wasn't that clear on that in my 20s and most of my 30s, but certainly in the last few years, I realized that, I mean, look, once I left working full time with Alex Epstein and went out on my own, part of what became clear to me is that I'm not really interested in reaching a big audience. I was interested in helping objectivists reach big audiences and be effective with them.
Yep.
So that's kind of my personal mission. The only reason that that's changed now is that to reach my fiction goals, which is to be able to sell enough copies to be able to free up more time to write fiction, that audience growth has become more of a thing. And yeah, it's not so much frustrating as it's just, how do you solve the puzzle? And I think I've gotten enough feedback, including from like non-objectivists and non-fans of mine who really love the novel, that I know the novel's good. So it's just an issue of how to raise awareness. And then it's just a puzzle to be solved, not something that, you take personally.
Let's see. Michael says, Don, why aren't you doing more debates and talks? We need you. You're too low profile. I think this direct feeds into what you just said.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to do more talks. I love talks. It's for me, it's kind of like the writer's reward. Writing is rewarding in the sense that, a good workout is rewarding. It's tough, it's intense, but you feel amazing after it's through.
Talk is more like sex, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really great analogy. I mean, you get to just step on a stage and kind of like bask in all the hard work you've done, and you get that immediate connection to the audience. Yeah. And so I love it. I'd love to do more of it. I do not like debates. They stress me out to watch that. I actually have more stress like watching Yaron and Alex and people debate than I do myself. But even so, and to do them well, at least for me to do them well, I'm not very quick on my feet. So I have to do a lot of preparation and basically think, what's everything they could say? How would I answer it in a punchy, effective way? It's a whole big thing. And when I do that, I can do them well, but it's not an enjoyable experience for me. So I'd much rather cheer on Yaron and, if I can give any assistance to the prep side, I'm happy to do that and to teach people how to debate. But no, if I never do another debate again in my life, I will not be displeased. But I do want to do more speaking and hopefully be able to make that happen.
Yeah, if you guys know anybody who can get Don some speaking gigs, paying gigs, then you can contact Don. We definitely, Don's a great speaker, so it would be great to get him on the road speaking. Let's see. Frank says, do you, I didn't plant this question, but here it is. It's on my list of questions. Frank scooped us. No, it's you knew this was coming. Do you ever have to deal with sensitivity readers?
Oh, good. I was worried we weren't going to get to this. Yeah. So that is a very good question. So this book takes, it deals with issues like race. And now I was writing this before the kind of second wave of Black Lives Matter. And so it only became more contentious and more relevant since, as the book was about to come out. And for those of you who don't know, one of the trends in the literary world over the last, 5 years or so is that if you're going to deal with other so-called races and genders and sexual identities, then that's not really your story to tell, but you should also have representation. So you have to include them, but to make sure that you do it in a non-offensive way, what you need to do is give it to a sensitivity reader. And there, the idea is that by virtue of having dark skin or by virtue of being attracted to the same sex, you are now a spokesperson for what is offensive and not offensive to people who share these characteristics. So that's kind of the basic theory. And then people can give you feedback. So as you might guess, I have a pretty low opinion of this. But I was very curious as I was about to begin querying agents for the book. I was curious. I was like, I wonder what they would say about my book. And so I looked up for somebody who had a lot of experience as a young Black female, and she got her sister to do it with her. So I got two opinions, and then also found a different black woman to look at it. So I was trying to get, not just one person to do it. And then it turned out my publisher, without telling me, they had a sensitivity reader look at it much later in the process. So I've been sensitivity read up the wazoo. But I will tell you this, I was actually pleasantly surprised with the experience. And in part, it's because the main sensitivity reader I got gave a lot of good writing feedback, quite apart from anything to do with, race, sex, class. She just was really smart about writing. And I mean, her background is in psychology, and she had some really good insights about psychology. So that really helped too. Yeah, if you can get a sensitivity reader who's a great editor. Yeah. But the other thing that surprised me is that she genuinely seemed to want to help. Like, her goal was not to tell you, don't say this, don't say that, that's wrong. Rather, it was to bring to my awareness things that I might not have been aware of. Like, oh, did you realize that this character comes across as a stereotype? And she pointed that out in several cases. And most of the times I said, no, there's a reason I'm doing that. Several times, though, I didn't realize it. It was unnecessary. And I found it really helpful that, and they weren't big things. Like, it wasn't, something where it would have, gotten me canceled or made headlines, but it was just something that I had overlooked. And it goes to a point of a lot of our discussions about race are plausible. The bad ideas about race are made plausible through package dealing. Yep. It really is easy not to understand people that you don't spend a lot of time with. And I spend time with people from all places and colors and things, but I'm not living in those, I think it's probably a byproduct of a lot of historical racism, that there is very definite subcultures by skin color and by sexual identity and things like that. But nevertheless, it is true that there's a lot I don't know or wouldn't realize, could come across as clueless or thoughtless and so on. So there was little things like that she pointed out I found valuable. But I will say this, that as much as she was trying her best to be helpful, and as much as in some cases she was helpful, what writers are being told to do is outrageous and irrational, which, as I indicated before, it was, you better have representation, and it better, but it better not be, but you better not be trying to speak for, races that aren't yours, and sexual preferences that aren't yours, and so on. And then it's, you better not be stereotypical, but you better not be inauthentic. So this is one thing where I really did object to the advice, which is that you were put in this position. I'll give you this example. If I had a Black woman who was ugly, overweight or something, oh, this is the stereotype of the overweight, big, bold Black woman. And then it was, I had a character who was Black and very beautiful, and it's, oh, that's the stereotype of the seductress Black woman. And it's, well, what do you want me to do? And so
make them Black, but great.
Yeah. And so it really is an impossible, completely irrational situation, the way that it's done. But there is a real thing of, if you're trying to write about the people in our world today. So, Ayn Rand was writing about her universe that she was projecting, with Atlas Shrugged. She wanted she wanted to be fully created by her. I'm trying to set my things in today's world. And so if I'm trying to write a person who's like, a kind of typical person you'd meet in the white nationalist movement, they need to talk like that movement. They need to act like people.
They're probably going to be white.
Yeah, they're probably going to be white. Or if I'm going to write about a Black character, I at least want to know, does he see himself or herself as rebelling against what most, the place he grew up in? Does he see himself as conforming? Is he conforming? I need to get that dynamic. And I grew up in a more diverse background than most people. I'm from a military family. And so we were, it was, I really didn't believe that racism existed until I was in my late teens, just because I couldn't comprehend. It was so alien from what I had seen growing up. But again, that's something that like only a white kid is gonna like have the luxury of believing doesn't exist, right? So there are things to learn, and a sensitivity reader, God help that title, it can be, and in my case was helpful in some cases, but the overarching motive for it and the way that it's done is really anti-writer, and frankly filled with a lot of racism and so on. Yep. So I thought it was an interesting experience, and I'm glad that I did it, but it's really a shame that it's thought of the way it is today, is these are the gatekeepers for your novel.
Yeah, and it's destructive to creativity. It's unbelievably destructive to creativity. Jeff, thank you. That's very generous. Thanks for the support. Jeff gave $100. Let's see. Superkill ask, Super Pill. It's not kill, it's pill.
Superkill is a good thriller novel title.
Yeah, but he's got a KPILL, so Super Pill. Super K Pill. Let's see. Don, do you still do a podcast? I used to listen to one called Debt Dialogues every day on my way to work.
I did that with the Yaron Institute, and I've done several since. So one is for a project that Yaron and I have along with our colleague, Robert Hendershot, and it's the Ingenuism project. Go to ingenuism.com. You should sign up for our newsletter. But Yaron and I just did a podcast for that today. We have a newsletter. We have an interview show there. That's a really amazing project where one of the great things, Yaron and I, for the last few years, have been thinking about how could we work together again. But one thing that we really wanted to do was something that was positive, something that was optimistic. And with Ingenuism, our focus is on what are the forces that create progress, and in particular, how are they shaping up in the 21st century in ways that might be unique to what we've seen in the past. So that's one of the main areas that I do. I also have my personal podcast, The Don Watkins Show, which is on YouTube at Don Watkins Live. So youtube.com/Don Watkins Live. And that's more of an indulgence. I kind of just will interview people I find interesting about all sorts of topics. Yaron's been on it to talk about speaking, which is a really excellent episode. And I've had a bunch of different guests, and I've also done kind of other things on that channel. I actually, the thing that people are have been most found most valuable is I took Leonard Peikoff's book, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, and it has something like, 60 sections to it, each major principle in objectivism. And I went through and did the commentaries on OPAR series, where for each section I do a video where I just kind of summarize what Leonard said and then add any elaborations, any kind of tools to help people understand it, apply it, and solve some of the puzzles that I had and that others tend to have with their first time reading it. So you could find all that there. But I do a lot of different things. And I also do some stuff with the Ayn Rand Center UK people, including a communication boot camp where I help out anybody who wants to become a better communicator. I basically do for them for members who I think pay like $10 a month, what I usually charge people, $250 an hour to do as private clients.
So Brad just put us over at the top. So Brad, thank you. It's another $100. So we're now over $600. That's
great.
Our goal. Yeah. It's somebody asked what percentage you get of the super chat.
Well, indirectly, probably a lot.
Yeah. Hopefully you guys are buying a lot of the books. I get no royalties on the books, on this book. I get no royalties on any books.
Yeah.
Don and I are talking about a project, but to be determined still. So somebody asked about, are we going to be doing books together? So we are talking about something. We'll see. We will.
Yeah.
See.
Hopefully that'll be my next nonfiction project. So.
Yeah. All right. Wow, we've already got an hour 25. Okay, we've got some miscellaneous questions here. Liam asked, I guess this is for you because you wrote the book on Social Security. This was the first question I asked in the super chat. Liam asked, would you recommend taking out Social Security as soon as you turn 62 or waiting until you're 65 or 70?
Oh, I mean, the general advice is to wait, because the net benefit tends to be greater if you take it later. So, but that's more an accountant's question. I assume that it's sort of a question based on like what's going to happen to it politically, but nobody really knows that, and something will change. But
I'm not
really,
taking out mine, and I'm in that. I just hit that age group, so I'm keeping mine. I mean, I can't even imagine taking Social Security. It seems.
yeah, I mean,
maybe I should.
I'm skeptical there's going to be big changes to Social Security because it's actually not that hard to make it, how would you put it, politically acceptable in terms of its cost. Medicare is the big one where there's going to have to be dramatic changes. And I mean, essentially, I think that unless the country really changes direction in the next decade, I mean, we're going to unfortunately get some form of socialized healthcare just because the way that our current system is structured is so bad and unsustainably bad.
Yep.
But yeah, with Social Security, I think it's they will do enough small tweaks that it'll probably go on for another, at least for our relevant time scales, in a form more or less like it is.
I think that's right. I think that the bigger issue is healthcare, because that's where the real expenses are. That's where the deficits are massive, and that's where the system is inefficient. So you either go to truly private system, and that means getting, somehow privatizing Medicare, which there's a way to do it, but very few people talk about it, or you go to complete socialized medicine. The current system's not sustainable.
Yeah.
So Zev puts in $20. He's just excited by the fact that the Atlanta Braves won. I don't know if that's just to piss you off, Don. I guess it is.
Yeah. Well,
Don's a Philly fan.
Phillies fan. Yeah.
Well,
it was.
My Red Sox got beat
year
by Houston too, so it was not a good playoff. So they did make it much further than anybody expected. Okay, Michael's got the cat out of the bag. When are you and Don writing your Rules for Life book? We'll see. To be determined. But you guys will know
if you super chat a few $10,000.
That's right.
We will definitely do it.
That's right. So there is a threshold of we'll need to raise some money to do it once we're fully committed to it. We're not fully committed to it yet. Once we're fully committed to it, we will. Michael also asks, have you and Alex ever done mushrooms and discussed philosophy?
To my knowledge, Alex has not done any drugs. I have certainly not done them with him, but we have certainly discussed philosophy. And my drug days ended before I really knew anything about. I guess I kind of knew philosophy, but I was like a college freshman, and that they were not. I was more interested at that point in girls than having philosophic discussions.
Yeah,
this is not an endorsement of any kind of behavior. But,
no, and I'm not sure mushrooms is the right thing to be taking if you want to talk about philosophy. Just not from experience, but from what I've heard about mushrooms. So, unless the philosophy is Kantian, and then maybe the mushrooms connect you directly to the actual reality. That's according to what's his name?
Sam Harris.
Sam Harris, yes. Drugs connect you to the real reality. That's when you're on drugs, you know the truth.
Yeah, no, I really find that outrageous. As somebody who experimented with all the ones that Sam talks about when I was younger, and somebody really interested in philosophy, I can say, you don't learn anything important. You can have interesting experiences or whatever, but you don't learn anything valuable about reality. It's just, I don't even think you really learn anything valuable about your mind. I think they can be used in therapeutic. I think they could be used in therapeutic contexts. I think where there's more and more evidence that mushrooms and MDMA and potentially others, ketamine, have therapeutic uses. So I'm not downgrading that, but the idea that it gives you philosophic insight, I just flatly deny it. And that's why I'm saying I'm informed. So, if he's going to throw around his experience as evidence, I'll throw around mine.
And I'm going to take Don's experiential evidence any day over Sam Harris's. So, because I have none personally. So, I grew up in Israel. You ate mushrooms. That's about it. Or you didn't because they were poisonous and you left them alone. All right, let's see. Don, I'm an avid listener, reader of Alex Epstein's. Do you have any future collaboration plans with him?
Nothing in particular, but I mean, we're on great terms and still stay in touch. And, I would love to work together. I mean, my problem at this point is just I'm having to become way more disciplined about saying no to things. Mm-hmm. There's this really, when you're early in your career, it's really important to say yes, because that's where all your opportunities come from. And thankfully, I've, been able to reach the point in my career where there's more opportunity than there is what I can take advantage of. And so a lot of it is, I'm really happy with the projects I'm working on now. I get to work with Yaron. I get to work with a couple other people that I really value, and I get to write the kind of books I want to write. And that's more than a full plate already. So I have to be really disciplined about saying yes to things. But certainly if it was time delimited, there's virtually nothing I wouldn't do with Alex, just because I have a lot of admiration for him, and he's a really good friend.
Jennifer recommends truffles.
Oh, yeah.
I'll take some mushrooms. All right. Yeah. Ian writes, did you know Canada's National Post is doing a pro-capitalism series called the Capitalist Manifesto? Might be worth commenting on. P.S. Don's new book is great. Look forward to the sequel. I did not know that Canada's National Post is doing that. I will look for it. They have some really good writers that have clearly been influenced by Ayn Rand at the National Post. They used to write some pretty good articles. They interviewed me a few times when I was at the Institute. So there's definitely some good people at the National Post. All right, Michael writes, is Gulp a good name for the first objectivist coffee shop in Austin, Texas? No, it's not.
Yeah, but I actually take, if you put this in the wider perspective, Yaron, look, ideally, I mean, a movement is going to have a culture to it, and it's going to have certain traditions. It's going to have, things, and there's a kind of cringe factor, and certainly Ayn Rand hated it when people would kind of like ape the characters and everything like that. But there's got to be something like that.
I mean, it's fine. I mean, I could take Galt's coffee shop even, but Galt's Gulp. I mean, it's
I think the problem is the pun part of it.
Doesn't work, and it's a little, I don't know, too. What would be the word?
And I love puns, but look, there's a danger. There's a real, one of the hardest, Ayn Rand had this point about, you don't need to break with society like in Atlas Shrugged. You need to break with the culture. And one of the hardest things about breaking with the culture is that, in our culture, everything, humor is appropriate everywhere with regard to everything. And being cute and silly, like there's nothing ever wrong with it. It's really hard to hold on to reverence.
Yeah. And
anything that robs reverence from the thinker and novelist and the novels that I most revere, I have a really negative reaction to, even if I have a very positive reaction of the intention behind it. And so I think we just have to think about we want to pay tribute to the things we have in common, and that's great. How do we do it without undermining the reverence for it? I think it's an important question to ask ourselves.
Yep. Yeah, this came out of a conversation about we should have an objectivist coffee shop where people hang around and talk philosophy and have events and do stuff like that. And then maybe we should have salons where people get together and listen to music and have conversations and read poetry and do things like that. So maybe there's a little bit of that starting in Texas. Cook, I think, is organizing some of that. I don't think it's on the show today, doing salons, but yeah, I think there'll be an objectivist coffee shop in Austin, Texas. I think
one funny thing to look back on.
Don is not moving to Austin, Texas, though. That's the one.
Oh, but hopefully I'll visit all the time.
He likes
But yeah, I actually do like the cold. But if you think about what Ayn Rand and her friends used to do back in the day, like
yeah.
they had these little jokes, but it wasn't like, hey, we're going to call ourselves, the Rourke, whatever, the Rourke Club. It was, we're the collective. Like, it's kind of this funny tongue in cheek. Or I think there was a famous softball game where it was like the Attilas versus the witch doctors. So like, there's ways that you can cash in on, the things inside objectivism in a way that's fun or whatever, but doesn't quite go that route. So
I have horror stories from objectivists trying to play baseball. So, but for another time. Don, are you optimistic about the future of Western civilization? Just a casual question.
This is really hard. I'm optimistic by nature, and I think, extremely optimistic for most of my career. I'm much less so now.
Yep.
Though I think one of the things that we see, one of the things that's great about the Ingenuism project is there are still a lot of amazing things happening. There's a lot of amazing people, and look, it's very dangerous to judge long-term trends from the short term. And if somebody said in the 70s, "Are you optimistic about the future?" every objectivist would and did say, like, no, we're headed towards disaster. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. And then they got a reprieve. And the fact that they got one doesn't guarantee that we get one. But we're at a particularly bad time. And it's just very hard for me to be optimistic. And frankly, it's one of the reasons why I like to focus less on political things and more on philosophic things. So I'm not pulling away from the fight, but I'd rather wage it in ways that frankly depress me less. And so I'd rather be talking about ethics and how you can use objectivism to make yourself more successful, and about technology and about the virtues of progress than I would, taking on some of these more negative issues. Though I'm glad that there's people who are taking those on, like Yaron and Alex and them, because it needs to happen. But for me personally, I just don't have the stomach for it, not as a full-time thing.
Yep. Yeah, some of us enjoy the fight in that sense, but there's certainly division of labor is important in a movement, and not everybody should be doing politics. Politics is not the most important thing by far. It's not, even for the short-term success or failure of a culture. Politics is not the most important thing. So there's a lot more important work needs to be done. All right, we got two quick ones. Let's see. Michael asked, well, it's not really a question. I'm seeing a ton of videos about Ayn Rand being produced by non-objectivists, YouTube channels. This is a very good sign, even though most of these videos are hostile towards her. Yeah, I think our attitude has always been that publicity is good, and the fact that people feel the need, the fact that people are listening to the stuff means that means they see as a threat, which is a good thing, and B, other people listen to this and say, why do these people view as a threat? Right? The fact that Paul Krugman has to write something negative about Ayn Rand every 6 months or so is a good sign. It means that a lot of people are being exposed to her name and her ideas as at least pissing off Paul Krugman, and that's got to increase readership.
Well, let me just give one quick story in that regard. So the way I discovered Ayn Rand is I was reading books by this guy, Robert Ringer, and he would quote her a lot, but he basically had this section about how, like, yeah, eventually I realized that her books don't actually apply to reality and so on. And I remember having the reaction of, okay, I mean, I admired this guy. He, his books had changed my life, Ringer's, but whatever he thought about her, she sounded damn interesting. Yeah. So I wanted to learn more. And then once I read her, I said, no, Ringer got it wrong. Rand got it right. And that's my view. My view is often these people, whether they're smearing her, or attacking her, or, sneering at her, whatever they're doing, they often can't help but make Ayn Rand sound interesting because she's interesting.
Yeah.
And curious, intelligent people are interested in what's interesting. And the other thing to remember, because look, I'm not above getting depressed or angered when I see the latest lie and smear about Ayn Rand from Krugman or anybody else. But the thing that I remember is that at the end of the day, 1 million of those smears don't matter at all in the face of one recommendation from a person someone admires. That is, if you actually look at how people discover Ayn Rand, it's often, they heard all those stories, they heard all those misconceptions, and then somebody they looked up to in some way said, hey, you should read Atlas Shrugged. And they go, okay. Yeah. So that it's the easiest thing in the world to conquer. We just need more people who are admired by more and better people.
Yep. Scott says that's how he got into her. Alec writes, I learned about her from the John Oliver video.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Colt asks, I would like to be a writer in the future. I have ideas and I want to explore them. I also want to write good characters. Do you have any good advice? Any more advice?
I mean, look, at the end of the day, there's only two major pieces of advice because there's only two major things that you have to do to become a writer. And that's read a lot and write a lot. And that's true for nonfiction. That's true in fiction. It's just the more that you read and the more that you write. And when I say write, it includes you want to get feedback. But at the end of the day, if you're putting words on paper and ideally putting them out into the world in some form so that you get some form of feedback, even if it's not from a professional editor, it's from the market. Like, are people paying attention to it? Or are they ignoring it? That's really the key ingredient. And the worst thing that you can do is like wait till you're ready, because you will never be ready if all you're doing is waiting. And so, I mean, like, look, I feel very lucky in that I got this amazing chance to start my career because when I was 23, ARI said, hey, do you want to come write for us? But that only happened because I was the top writing student at the OAC at that time. And that only happened because I literally spent all my time from the age of 13 or 14 until I was 22, 23, reading and writing about objectivism and other things in over and over, not just in my free time. Like, I would try to get my work done in half the time so I could spend the rest of work writing about philosophy. And it's like, it was those 10 years before I even got my start at ARI that like made it possible for me to get to that position. So it's read and write and you're golden.
Yeah. I mean, this connects to some of the work we do with Ingenuism. I mean, you've got to explore, you've got to try, you've got to be out there, you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to, just pursuing your goals and just trying and experimenting with stuff. And you're not gonna make it unless you do that.
And I will say, I should underline this because the way we're taught to read is so passive today. When you read, really try to identify, like, how does this work? What do I like about it? Or if it's bad, why don't I like it? Why did this get popular? Why did that not get popular? Like, really think about it and become a student of it. One of the things that's so striking is, objectivists like to read stuff that are, the stuff that Ayn Rand praised. But if you look at her, she read everything in her field when she was, trying to learn how to become a novelist. She even, read Tolstoy. She called it her most boring literary duty. But by literary duty, she meant if I want to write novels, and this is one of the most celebrated novelists in world literature, I got to read it. I got to know how they do what they do and why I don't want to do that. And so it's not just reading in the way that you'd pick up something at the beach and, race through it, but really try to figure out what works and what doesn't. And like, that should be fun, like not a homework assignment, right? But just understanding what's making things tick and what makes readers tick. To me, that's the never ending puzzle of writing. And that's what really motivates me.
Yep. All right, let's see. Seth says, my youth pastor told me, quote, be careful reading Ayn Rand. That's all I needed. I was sold. Yep. All right, Michael, the longer I sit and listen to my professors, the more I realized Ayn Rand was the only thinker in history who actually knew anything of substance and depth and actually knew how to put the concepts together. A little bit of an exaggeration there, Michael, but she was amazing. She was really amazing. All right. I'm putting the link to the book again. All right, guys. Don, thank you. This was great. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for being on. Hopefully we sold some books and we'll sell more. And don't forget, guys, to write reviews. That's the most important thing on Amazon right now. No matter how many there are on there, write more. So thank you all the super chatters. This is good. I mean, you guys are convincing me that maybe I should do more interviews. So this is the second interview I've done where we've reached our fundraising goal. So that's terrific. So thank you guys. Thanks for all of you participating in the super chat. Thanks for everybody who supports the show monthly on yaronbookshow.com/support. And again, thanks, Don. I'll see you, I think, tomorrow. Yes. I think we've got some, we like have, it turns out that we have meetings almost every day. So so it's almost like when we worked at the Institute, not quite, but almost.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. All of you can get daily interviews or meetings with Yaron. A lot of fun. No, thanks for having me on, Yaron. This is
pleasure.
This is a great conversation.
Yeah, this was fun. Good. Thanks, everybody. Have a good